Right now, as you listen to these words, your mind is doing something you are completely unaware of. Before your eyes even finish processing the world around you, your brain has already decided what reality is supposed to look like. It predicts shapes before you fully see them. It predicts emotions before people even speak. It predicts danger before anything actually happens. And most terrifying of all, it edits your reality so smoothly that you mistake the edited version for truth itself. You believe you are seeing the world directly, but neuroscience says something very different. Your brain is not a camera dot, it is a prediction machine. And once you understand this, your entire perception of reality begins to crack dot, because if your mind is constantly constructing the world before you consciously experience it, then a disturbing question appears. How much of your life is real dot, and how much of it is a mental rendering created inside your own consciousness? This is where the observer effect stops being just a strange physics experiment and starts becoming deeply personal, because the observer is not just looking at reality, the observer may be generating it. For decades, scientists believed perception worked in a simple way. Information entered your eyes, traveled into the brain, and then you experienced the world exactly as it was, clean, objective, mechanical. But modern neuroscience destroyed that idea. Today, researchers studying predictive processing believe your brain works almost in reverse. Instead of passively receiving reality, the brain constantly predicts reality first and only later checks incoming sensory information to see if its prediction was correct. Think about how shocking that really is. The world you experience may not begin outside of you. It may begin inside your nervous system. Your consciousness is not simply reacting to existence. It is actively constructing it in real time, every second. Your brain receives overwhelming amounts of sensory data: colors, sounds, textures, movement, temperature, emotions, facial expressions, memories, fears, expectations. The amount of information hitting your nervous system every moment is impossible for conscious awareness to process fully. If your brain tried to experience raw reality directly, you would freeze under the weight of infinite information. So your brain cheats. It creates shortcuts. Predictions. Assumptions. Filters. And then it presents you with a simplified version of reality that feels stable enough for survival. This means your experience of life is heavily edited before it reaches conscious awareness. In other words, your mind is not showing you reality. It is showing you a useful interpretation of reality. That distinction changes everything, because useful does not always mean true. Think about optical illusions. You know those images where two people look at the same picture and see completely different things. One person sees an old woman. Another sees a young woman. One person sees a vase. Another sees two faces staring at each other. The image itself never changes. Only perception changes. And once your brain locks into one interpretation, it becomes extremely difficult to see the other version. Why? Because your brain prefers certainty over truth. Your nervous system would rather feel confident than accurate. Now apply this to your entire life. Maybe the person you think hates you does not actually hate you. Maybe your brain predicted rejection before the interaction even began. Maybe the reason opportunities always seem to disappear from your life is because your nervous system has already rendered failure as the most probable reality. Maybe the reason some people constantly find danger, betrayal, and disappointment is because their minds are unconsciously searching for evidence that confirms the internal world they already expect. This is called predictive perception, and it quietly shapes almost every human experience. The reticular activating system inside your brain plays a huge role in this process. This network acts like a filter for reality. Every second, your brain receives millions of pieces of information, but your conscious awareness can only focus on a tiny fraction of them. So the reticular activating system decides what deserves attention. But here is the dangerous part. It chooses based on what your brain already believes is important. This means your beliefs literally influence what becomes visible inside your reality. If you buy a new car, suddenly you start seeing that same car everywhere. The cars were always there. Your attention simply changed. If you believe people cannot be trusted, your brain becomes hyper-focused on betrayal. If you believe you are unlucky, your nervous system becomes trained to notice evidence of failure while ignoring evidence of success. The observer inside you quietly edits the world to match your expectations, and once this happens repeatedly, your perception starts feeling objective. You stop questioning it. You call it reality. But what if reality is partially shaped by the structure of attention itself? Now things begin getting strange, because this idea starts connecting directly with quantum physics. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles behave differently when observed. When no observation occurs, particles move like waves of probability. But when observation enters the experiment, those same particles collapse into fixed positions. The observer changes the outcome. Scientists still debate what this truly means. Some argue consciousness itself plays no role. Others believe awareness may somehow interact with physical reality in ways we still do not fully understand. But regardless of interpretation, one fact remains undeniable: observation changes behavior. And this principle exists not only in physics laboratories, but also inside human psychology. People behave differently when watched. Your emotions change when attention moves toward them. Thoughts become stronger when focused on repeatedly. Fear grows when observed obsessively. Confidence expands when reinforced consistently. Attention is not passive. Attention is creative. Now imagine what happens when billions of human minds continuously focus on fear, conflict, anger, outrage, scarcity, and anxiety every single day. What kind of collective reality begins forming from that observation? This is where the modern world becomes psychologically dangerous, because for the first time in human history, massive systems are competing for control over your attention every second. Social media platforms understand something terrifying about the human brain. Attention shapes perception. Perception shapes emotion. Emotion shapes behavior. Behavior shapes reality. The algorithms do not merely show you content, they shape the lens through which you interpret existence itself. Every click trains your nervous system. Every scroll conditions your emotional expectations. Every outrage headline teaches your brain what reality supposedly looks like. And because the human nervous system evolved to prioritize danger, negativity spreads faster than peace. Fear captures attention more efficiently than calmness. Anger creates engagement more effectively than wisdom. This means modern technology is not simply influencing culture. It may be hijacking the observer itself. Think carefully about that. If your consciousness helps shape your reality, and external systems are constantly manipulating your attention, then those systems may indirectly shape the reality you experience, not through magic, not through conspiracy, through neuroscience. Through conditioning. Through perception. The observer effect becomes deeply personal once you realize your attention is constantly being programmed. Now consider another disturbing possibility. What if two people can live inside completely different realities while sharing the exact same world? One person sees opportunity everywhere. Another sees hopelessness everywhere. One sees beauty. Another sees decay. One experiences connection. Another experiences isolation. And both believe their perception is objective truth. This happens because every human being carries a different mental rendering engine. Your childhood shaped it. Your trauma shaped it. Your memories shaped it. Your fears shaped it. Your culture shaped it. Your nervous system learned patterns over years of experience and now predicts reality according to those patterns. You are not simply observing life. You are interpreting it through invisible filters. This explains why two siblings raised in the same home can grow into completely different psychological worlds. It explains why some people walk into rooms expecting rejection, while others expect acceptance. It explains why some individuals unconsciously recreate the same painful relationships over and over again. Their internal rendering system predicts familiar emotional realities, and the brain prefers familiarity, even when familiarity causes suffering. This is why change feels uncomfortable, not because transformation is impossible, but because your nervous system mistakes unfamiliarity for danger. The observer inside you wants consistency, even if consistency keeps you trapped. And suddenly the observer effect becomes terrifyingly intimate, because the observer is not neutral. The observer is conditioned. Your perception is shaped by invisible programming you rarely notice. The greatest illusion is believing you see reality clearly. Maybe you do not. Maybe none of us do completely. Maybe consciousness itself is a hall of mirrors where perception, expectation, memory, biology, and attention continuously interact to generate what we call reality. And if that is true, then the most important question is no longer what reality is. The real question becomes this: who is controlling the observer inside your mind? Most people believe manipulation happens through force, but the most powerful manipulation in human history happens through attention. Control what a person looks at long enough, and eventually you begin controlling what they believe is real. This is why the modern attention economy is far more dangerous than most people realize, because it does not merely influence opinions. It shapes perception itself. Your brain evolved in environments where attention meant survival. Ancient humans, who noticed threats quickly, were more likely to stay alive. A sudden movement in the bushes could mean a predator. A strange sound at night could mean danger. So the human nervous system became highly sensitive to fear, uncertainty, and emotional intensity. And modern systems learned how to exploit this ancient biological weakness. Every notification, every endless feed, every outrage cycle, every emotionally charged headline is competing for one thing: your conscious attention. Because attention is energy. Attention determines what becomes psychologically real inside your mind. The more attention you give something, the more your brain strengthens the neural pathways connected to it. This is how your internal reality slowly becomes shaped over time. If you constantly consume fear-based information, your nervous system adapts to expect danger. If you constantly absorb conflict and division, your perception starts interpreting neutral situations as threatening. If you repeatedly expose yourself to anxiety-driven environments, eventually your brain begins predicting anxiety before it even appears. And once prediction becomes automatic, your reality changes. Not objectively. Subjectively, but subjective reality is still the reality you live inside every day. That distinction matters, because even if the external world remains the same, your experience of existence can become completely transformed by perception alone. Think about social media for a moment. Two people open the same app. One enters a reality filled with motivation, creativity, education, and inspiration. Another enters a reality dominated by outrage, comparison, insecurity, and emotional exhaustion. The platform itself did not create one fixed reality. The algorithm adapted to the observer, and the observer adapted to the algorithm. This feedback loop is one of the most psychologically powerful systems humanity has ever created. Your attention teaches the machine what to show you. The machine then teaches your brain what reality supposedly looks like. Over time, perception narrows, confirmation bias strengthens. The observer becomes trapped inside a customized psychological universe. This is why people living in the same country, same city, sometimes even the same household, can experience entirely different versions of reality. Because modern consciousness is increasingly algorithmic. Your attention history becomes your reality blueprint. And once enough emotional reinforcement occurs, the brain stops distinguishing between objective truth and repeated exposure. The familiar starts feeling true. This is one reason propaganda works so effectively throughout history. Repeat an idea often enough, and the nervous system begins accepting it automatically. Not because the information is accurate, but because repetition creates neurological familiarity. The brain confuses familiarity with safety, and safety feels true. Now connect this with the observer effect. If observation influences experience, then repeated attention patterns gradually reshape your emotional and psychological world. This means Your reality is not only influenced by what exists externally, it is influenced by what your consciousness repeatedly observes internally. Every thought you revisit strengthens certain neural pathways. Every emotional loop deepens psychological conditioning. Every fear repeatedly imagined trains the brain to anticipate danger. The observer inside your mind slowly becomes programmed through repetition. This is why anxious people often feel trapped inside endless cycles of overthinking. Their nervous systems become addicted to prediction. The brain believes constant anticipation creates safety, but in reality, it creates psychological imprisonment. The observer becomes trapped inside its own defensive simulations, and this happens so subtly that most people never notice it. They simply call it personality, but personality itself may partially be accumulated prediction patterns reinforced over years. You think you are discovering reality. Often, you are replaying conditioned interpretations of reality. This becomes even more intense when trauma enters the equation. Trauma fundamentally changes how the observer processes existence. A traumatic event teaches the nervous system that certain outcomes are dangerous. Afterward, the brain becomes hyper-vigilant. It constantly scans reality for similar threats. This changes perception dramatically. Someone betrayed in the past may begin interpreting neutral behavior as dishonesty. Someone abandoned emotionally may start perceiving rejection everywhere. Someone humiliated repeatedly may unconsciously expect failure before trying anything new. And because the brain predicts these outcomes, attention selectively notices evidence that confirms them. The observer reinforces the wound. This creates painful psychological loops where people unknowingly participate in maintaining the realities they fear most, not because they consciously want suffering, but because the nervous system prioritizes predictability over freedom. Predictable pain often feels safer than unfamiliar possibility. This explains why some individuals sabotage healthy relationships, why success creates anxiety instead of joy. Why peace can feel uncomfortable as years of emotional chaos. The observer inside the brain becomes addicted to familiar emotional environments, even destructive ones, and once again, the observer effect becomes deeply personal. Because your internal state influences what you perceive externally. Now imagine something even more unsettling. What if society itself functions as a massive collective observer? Billions of human minds focusing attention onto shared fears, narratives, expectations, and emotional patterns. What happens when entire civilizations repeatedly observe conflict, division, scarcity, and crisis? Psychologically, collective attention amplifies collective perception. Entire cultures begin interpreting reality through emotional filters reinforced by millions of people simultaneously. This does not mean thoughts magically control the universe like fantasy, but it does mean perception influences human behavior on enormous scales, and human behavior absolutely shapes reality. Fear changes economies, beliefs influence politics, narratives shape history, attention directs civilization. The observer effect may not just exist inside laboratories. It may operate psychologically across entire societies. And once you realize this, another question emerges. Can consciousness free itself from conditioned perception? Can the observer observe itself? This is where ancient philosophy, neuroscience, and modern psychology begin intersecting. Many spiritual traditions throughout history described awareness as something separate from thought. They taught that suffering intensifies when people become completely identified with mental patterns. Modern neuroscience surprisingly points towards something similar. Studies show mindfulness practices can weaken automatic emotional reactivity. In other words, awareness changes the way the brain processes experience. The moment you consciously observe a thought, instead of automatically believing it, something shifts. A gap appears between awareness and conditioning. You stop being fully controlled by the prediction. This may be one of the most powerful abilities human consciousness possesses, the ability to witness the observer itself, because once you notice your mental filters, they begin losing unconscious power over perception. You start realizing not every fear is truth, not every emotion is objective reality, not every thought deserves belief, and suddenly the observer effect changes direction. Instead of unconsciously reinforcing conditioned realities, awareness begins interrupting them. This is why self-awareness can feel psychologically destabilizing at first, because the brain resists uncertainty. It wants familiar interpretations, predictable identities, stable emotional patterns, but true awareness forces the observer to question its own assumptions. And once that process begins, reality itself starts feeling different, not because the external world magically transformed overnight, but because the lens through which you interpret existence begins evolving. You stop reacting automatically. You notice patterns. You become conscious of attention itself. And that may be where genuine freedom begins, not in controlling the entire universe, but in reclaiming ownership over the observer inside your own mind. And once again, the observer effect becomes deeply personal, because your internal state influences what you perceive externally. Now imagine something even more unsettling. What if society itself functions as a massive collective observer? Billions of human minds focusing attention onto shared fears, narratives, expectations, and emotional patterns. What happens when entire civilizations repeatedly observe conflict, division, scarcity, and crisis? Psychologically, collective attention amplifies collective perception. Entire cultures begin interpreting reality through emotional filters reinforced by millions of people simultaneously. This does not mean thoughts magically control the universe like fantasy, but it does mean perception influences human behavior on enormous scales, and human behavior absolutely shapes reality. Fear changes economies, beliefs influence politics, narratives shape history. Attention directs civilization. The observer effect may not just exist inside laboratories. It may operate psychologically across entire societies. And once you realize this, another question emerges. Can consciousness free itself from conditioned perception? Can the observer observe itself? This is where ancient philosophy, neuroscience, and modern psychology begin intersecting. Many spiritual traditions throughout history described awareness as something separate from thought. They taught that suffering intensifies when people become completely identified with mental patterns. Modern neuroscience surprisingly points towards something similar. Studies show mindfulness practices can weaken automatic emotional reactivity. In other words, awareness changes the way the brain processes experience. The moment you consciously observe a thought instead of automatically believing it, something shifts. A gap appears between awareness and conditioning. You stop being fully controlled by the prediction. This may be one of the most powerful abilities human consciousness possesses, the ability to witness the observer itself, because once you notice your mental filters, they begin losing unconscious power over perception. You start realizing not every fear is truth, not every emotion is objective reality, not every thought deserves belief, and suddenly the observer effect changes direction. Instead of unconsciously reinforcing conditioned realities, awareness begins interrupting them. This is why self-awareness can feel psychologically destabilizing at first, because the brain resists uncertainty. It wants familiar interpretations, predictable identities, stable emotional patterns, but true awareness forces the observer to question its own assumptions. And once that process begins, reality itself starts feeling different. Not because the external world magically transformed overnight, but because the lens through which you interpret existence begins evolving. You stop reacting automatically. You notice patterns. You become conscious of attention itself. And that may be where genuine freedom begins, not in controlling the entire universe, but in reclaiming ownership over the observer inside your own mind. There is a strange moment that happens when people begin waking up psychologically. At first, they think the world is changing around them, but eventually they realize something else happened first. Their perception changed. And once perception changes deeply enough, reality itself starts feeling different. Not because the universe suddenly became new, but because the observer is no longer rendering the world the same way. This is one of the most difficult ideas for the human mind to fully accept. You do not experience reality directly. You experience your nervous system's interpretation of reality, and that interpretation is constantly shaped by attention, memory, emotion, prediction, culture, trauma, belief, and expectation. Every human being lives inside a partially customized psychological universe. This does not mean objective reality does not exist. It means your access to it is filtered. The terrifying part is that most people never realize how strong those filters are. They think they are seeing life clearly, while unconsciously projecting years of conditioning onto every experience. Someone who secretly believes they are unworthy may interpret silence as rejection. Someone conditioned to distrust others may experience kindness with suspicion. Someone raised inside chaos may unconsciously feel uncomfortable in peace. The observer shapes emotional reality before logic even enters the picture. And because these patterns operate automatically, people often spend years trapped inside realities they unknowingly help maintain. This is why awareness matters so much. Awareness interrupts automatic rendering. The moment you become conscious of a mental filter, its power weakens slightly. You begin separating observation from identification. Instead of becoming every thought, you start witnessing thoughts. Instead of instantly believing fear, you begin questioning it. This may sound simple, but psychologically, it is revolutionary, because most human suffering is not caused solely by external events. It is intensified by unconscious interpretation. Two people can experience the exact same situation and emerge with completely different realities. One sees catastrophe, but another sees transformation. One sees humiliation, another sees growth. One sees endings, another sees beginnings. Reality passes through the observer before becoming experience. This is why internal perception changes external behavior so dramatically. And behavior shapes outcomes. A person expecting rejection behaves differently than someone expecting acceptance. A person convinced they will fail unconsciously hesitates, withdraws, and self-sabotages. A person who believes opportunity exists notices possibilities others completely ignore. The observer quietly influences action. Action influences consequence. Consequence reinforces belief. And the cycle continues. Most people call this personality. But personality may partly be repetitive perception loops, reinforced over time. You become what your nervous system repeatedly predicts. Now think about what this means in modern society. Every day, millions of people wake up and immediately surrender their attention to external systems. Phones become the first observer interface. Notifications become emotional triggers. Algorithms become invisible architects of perception. People no longer sit quietly with their own consciousness. They consume endless streams of stimulation that constantly shape emotional reality. And because outrage captures attention more effectively than peace, modern consciousness becomes increasingly anxious, divided, distracted, and emotionally reactive. The observer inside the human mind is under attack constantly, not physically. Psychologically, the modern world profits from fragmented attention. A distracted observer is easier to influence. A fearful observer is easier to manipulate. An exhausted observer becomes dependent on external guidance. This is why reclaiming attention may become one of the most important psychological acts of the future, because attention determines perception, and perception determines lived reality. If you lose conscious control over attention, you gradually lose conscious control over your inner world. This does not mean withdrawing completely from society. It means becoming intentional about what enters your nervous system repeatedly, because repetition builds psychological architecture. Every environment trains the observer. Every conversation influences emotional expectation. Every piece of media leaves neurological traces behind. Your mind becomes shaped by what it repeatedly consumes. Now return once more to the observer effect. In quantum physics, observation appears connected to measurable change. In psychology, attention clearly influences emotional and behavioral reality. In neuroscience, Predictive processing shows the brain constantly constructing experience before conscious awareness fully emerges, and in everyday human life, perception silently shapes relationships, decisions, opportunities, fears, identities, and meaning. All these ideas point toward one uncomfortable truth. Human beings may be far less objective than they believe. You are not merely looking at reality, but you are participating in its interpretation constantly. This realization can feel overwhelming at first, because it forces you to confront how much unconscious conditioning shapes your life. But it can also become deeply empowering, because once you understand the observer is programmable, you realize it can also be retrained. Neuroplasticity proves the brain changes continuously based on repeated experience. Attention patterns can shift, emotional conditioning can evolve, trauma responses can heal gradually, mental filters can become visible. The observer is not permanently fixed, and this changes the meaning of freedom entirely. Maybe freedom is not controlling every external event. Maybe freedom begins when you stop being unconsciously controlled by your own conditioned perception. Maybe real intelligence is not accumulating endless information. Maybe it is learning how your mind constructs reality in the first place. The ancient philosophers often said, the greatest illusion is believing you already see clearly. Modern neuroscience quietly agrees, because the brain edits reality automatically, and most people never notice the editing process happening. But once you begin noticing it, something extraordinary happens. You stop reacting to every thought immediately. You stop assuming every emotion represents truth. You stop confusing mental prediction with objective certainty. A deeper awareness begins emerging behind perception itself, and this awareness changes how you move through the world. You become less hypnotized by fear, less manipulated by outrage, less controlled by external narratives. You begin choosing attention consciously instead of automatically. And that single shift transforms the observer. You start seeing how often your mind predicts rejection before conversations even happen. You notice how anxiety creates imaginary futures that feel real inside the body. You recognize how social conditioning influences identity more than you once believed. You realize how much suffering comes not from reality itself, but from unconscious interpretation layered onto reality. This does not make life perfect, but it makes awareness possible. And awareness changes everything. Because the observer effect inside human consciousness may not be about magically controlling the universe. It may be about recognizing how attention, perception, and awareness shape the reality you actually experience every day. The greatest battle is not always external. Sometimes the greatest battle is learning to see beyond the filters inside your own mind. And maybe that is why so many people feel disconnected from themselves. They have spent years looking outward without ever questioning the observer within. But the moment you begin observing your own perception honestly, reality starts revealing something deeper. You are not just a passive witness trapped inside existence. You are an active participant in the construction of experience. Your attention matters. Your perception matters. Your awareness matters, because your eyes are not simply showing you the world. Your mind is telling you what the world means before you even realize you are looking at it.